Teresa and Louie's $3 million IRS disaster exposed. Divorce cover-up finally revealed. For longtime viewers of the Real Housewives of New Jersey, it felt eerily familiar. More than a decade after serving time for fraud-related convictions tied to her former marriage, Teresa was once again facing intense public scrutiny, this time alongside her husband, Louie Ruelas. But as the internet raced ahead with dramatic headlines and social media exploded with speculation about an alleged divorce and a collapsing marriage, another story quietly unfolded inside public records and legal filings. And here's the part that makes this story far more complicated than a viral headline. Not every claim circulating online has been confirmed. Some reports focus on documented federal tax liens. Others leap much further, suggesting the marriage itself is on the verge of collapse. But where does documented fact end? And where does internet speculation begin? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. Because buried beneath the gossip, the reaction videos, and the endless social media debates is a financial story that reaches far beyond reality television. It's a story involving tax law, real estate, celebrity branding, legal responsibility, and the enormous pressure that comes when your personal life becomes a business worth millions. And perhaps the biggest mystery isn't whether Teresa and Louie owe money. It's whether they can survive everything that comes after. For nearly 2 decades, Teresa Giudice has been one of Bravo's most recognizable faces. Love her or criticize her, she's remained one of the defining personalities of the Real Housewives franchise. Viewers have watched her celebrate milestones, endure heartbreak, rebuild her life after prison, navigate divorce, raise 4 daughters, and eventually fall in love again. Her life has unfolded almost entirely in public. That visibility has created something unusual. Every success becomes a headline. Every setback becomes national entertainment. And every financial document suddenly becomes a trending topic. When Teresa married Louie Ruelas in August 2022, many fans believed they were witnessing the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Throughout interviews and television appearances, she often described their relationship as existing inside what she called a love bubble. It was a phrase that quickly became part of the Bravo vocabulary. To Teresa, it represented optimism. To critics, it represented blind faith. That difference in perception would eventually become incredibly important. Long before the recent financial headlines emerged, fans questioned whether the couple should have signed a prenuptial agreement before getting married. Teresa publicly explained that they chose not to. At the time, supporters viewed it as a romantic gesture built on trust. Others believed it ignored lessons from her past. Years later, those old conversations resurfaced almost overnight, not because of relationship drama, because of tax records. According to the source material you provided, public filings indicate that federal tax liens totaling approximately $3.03 million became the center of widespread attention. The transcript explains that this figure represents multiple tax liabilities rather than a single joint debt. That's an important distinction. When people hear a headline about a $3 million tax bill, it's easy to imagine one enormous unpaid invoice sitting on someone's desk. That's not how these situations usually work. Instead, the filings described in the source suggest separate obligations connected to different taxpayers and business interests, with the majority reportedly associated with Louie's financial obligations rather than Teresa's individual balance. The transcript also states that Teresa's legal representatives emphasized she has been making payments through an IRS installment plan. Those details don't erase the seriousness of federal tax liens, but they dramatically change how the story should be understood. Because once social media gets involved, nuance often disappears. Millions of viewers don't spend hours reading legal filings. They read headlines, and headlines rarely explain complicated tax law. The timing made everything even more dramatic. Reality television already thrives on conflict. Fans had spent seasons watching friendships fracture, family relationships deteriorate, cast members question Louie's business history, arguments spiral into full-scale feuds. Season 14 of Real Housewives of New Jersey became so divided that Bravo took the unusual step of replacing the traditional reunion with separate cast watch parties, a decision widely interpreted as evidence of just how fractured the relationships had become. The transcript repeatedly frames those conflicts as part of the broader public narrative surrounding the couple. Then the tax news arrived. Suddenly, years of television conflict merged with real financial questions. For audiences, it almost felt scripted, except it wasn't. Court records don't care about television ratings. Tax liens aren't written by producers. They exist independently of reality television. And that's exactly why they drew so much attention, because this wasn't another dinner table argument. It involved government filings, public records, legal consequences. Those things immediately carry a different level of seriousness. Yet one question kept resurfacing everywhere. How could Teresa find herself connected to another major financial controversy after everything she'd already lived through? It's a question that doesn't just come from critics. Many longtime supporters wondered the same thing. After all, Teresa has spoken extensively over the years about rebuilding her life following her previous legal troubles. She served her sentence, returned to television, re-established her career, published books, expanded business ventures, raised her daughters largely as a single parent after Joe Giudice's deportation. To many viewers, that journey represented resilience, which made the latest headlines feel almost surreal. Had she somehow ended up facing another financial nightmare? Or were the headlines exaggerating what the legal filings actually showed? Those are two very different possibilities. And understanding the difference requires looking beyond clickbait. One phrase appears again and again whenever legal experts discuss federal tax liens. They're often misunderstood. Many people assume a lien automatically means someone's property is about to be seized. That's not necessarily the case. As described in the transcript you shared, a federal tax lien is presented as a legal claim against property rather than an immediate seizure of assets. The source further explains that additional enforcement actions can occur if obligations remain unresolved or payment arrangements fail. That distinction matters because once headlines begin mentioning mansions, IRS filings, and millions of dollars, people naturally imagine moving trucks and foreclosure notices arriving the next morning. Reality is usually far more procedural. The legal process involves multiple stages: negotiations, payment plans, filings, deadlines, potential resolutions. Those details rarely generate viral headlines, but they're often where the real story lives. Then, another layer entered the conversation: the house. Few properties have appeared on reality television quite like Teresa and Louie's sprawling Montville estate. The source transcript describes it as a 7-bedroom luxury property purchased for approximately $3.35 million, later becoming the subject of discussions about financing arrangements and ownership structure. To fans, the mansion symbolized a fresh start, a new marriage, a rebuilt life, success after adversity, which is exactly why discussions surrounding the property immediately captured public attention. Homes carry emotional meaning, especially when audiences have watched someone's life unfold over 15 years. The mansion wasn't just real estate. It represented a promise. The promise that the difficult years were finally behind them. So when reports began linking that property to broader financial questions, people naturally wondered whether the symbol itself was beginning to crack. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this entire story isn't found inside legal documents. It's found inside public perception, because two people can read the exact same court filing and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person sees proof of financial collapse. Another sees a tax issue being handled through attorneys and payment plans. One sees the beginning of the end. Another sees another obstacle in a life already filled with public challenges. And somewhere between those competing narratives lies the truth, a truth that's often far less dramatic than social media would have us believe, yet no less significant. As we continue, we'll look more closely at the legal mechanics behind these filings, why experts pay close attention to ownership structures and business entities, and how years of public controversy have shaped the way every new development involving Teresa and Louie is interpreted, even before all the facts are known. According to the transcript you provided, one of the biggest reasons this story generated so much attention wasn't simply the dollar amount attached to the federal tax liens. It was the complicated financial structure surrounding the assets reportedly connected to Luis Ruelas and the legal questions that naturally followed. Once people started reading through public filings, instead of just scrolling past headlines, the conversation shifted from reality TV drama to something that looked much more like a business case study. That shift matters. Celebrity financial stories often begin with a shocking number, but the number itself rarely explains the situation. The real story is almost always hidden inside the paperwork. Ownership records, legal filings, repayment agreements, corporate structures, and the obligations that exist behind the scenes. Those are the details that determine what actually happens next. And in this case, those details became the center of intense public scrutiny. The transcript explains that the majority of the reported federal tax liabilities are associated with Louie's financial obligations rather than Teresa's individual debt. It also describes statements from Teresa's legal representatives indicating that she has been addressing her own tax obligations through an IRS installment agreement. Those are two very different situations, yet online discussions often blurred them together into one dramatic narrative. That's one of the challenges with celebrity news. Once a headline begins circulating, individual facts tend to merge into one larger storyline. Millions of people may remember the headline, but very few stop to distinguish between separate liabilities, different legal entities, or the difference between an allegation and a confirmed filing. As a result, the public conversation quickly became much larger than the underlying records themselves. The transcript then turns to the couple's Montville, New Jersey home, describing it as a luxury estate purchased for approximately $3.35 million. According to the source, ownership of the property was reportedly structured through a limited liability company rather than being held directly in the couple's personal names. The transcript goes on to discuss how some legal analysts believe that ownership structure could become relevant in the context of federal tax enforcement, although the source does not state that any enforcement action has occurred against the property itself. That distinction is critical. Public discussion often jumps straight from the existence of a tax lien to assumptions that a home is about to be seized or sold. But the transcript itself explains that a federal tax lien is generally a legal claim, not an immediate seizure of property, and that additional legal steps would typically be required before more aggressive collection actions could occur. It's an important reminder that legal processes unfold over time. They involve notices, negotiations, payment arrangements, deadlines, and in many cases, efforts to resolve outstanding obligations before more severe enforcement measures become necessary. Those procedural details may not generate viral headlines, but they often determine the outcome. Another point emphasized in the transcript is the discussion surrounding Teresa and Louie's decision not to sign a prenuptial agreement before their marriage. The source frames that earlier decision as one that has returned to the spotlight because of the current financial headlines, particularly as commentators debate how marital finances and legal responsibilities intersect. For many longtime viewers, this wasn't just a legal discussion. It became an emotional one. Fans remembered Teresa speaking enthusiastically about the relationship before the wedding. They remembered her optimism. They remembered the interviews where she explained that a prenup simply wasn't part of the plan. Looking back through today's lens, many online commentators interpreted that decision differently than they did at the time. Some viewed it as evidence of trust. Others questioned whether it exposed unnecessary financial risk. But it's important to separate public opinion from legal reality. Whether a couple signs a prenuptial agreement is only one factor among many when attorneys evaluate financial responsibility, and the specific legal consequences depend on numerous details beyond what has been discussed publicly. The transcript also revisits Teresa's previous legal history, reminding viewers why any new financial headline involving her naturally attracts extraordinary attention. It references her federal conviction related to fraud offenses from more than a decade ago, the sentence she served, and the eventual deportation of her former husband, Joe Giudice. The source presents this history as part of the broader public context surrounding current reporting, rather than suggesting that the present tax liens represent the same type of legal matter. That distinction cannot be overstated. A prior criminal case and current civil tax issues are not automatically equivalent. The transcript itself notes that tax liens are civil matters and distinguishes them from criminal tax investigations, while also observing that Teresa's previous legal history has influenced how many people interpret current events. In other words, the public remembers. History shapes perception. Whether fairly or unfairly, past events often become the lens through which new developments are viewed. That reality extends well beyond the courtroom. It affects television careers, business partnerships, brand relationships, and public trust. The source then connects these financial developments to the recent turbulence within the Real Housewives of New Jersey. According to the transcript, disputes involving Louie's business dealings and on-camera conflicts became recurring subjects during seasons 13 and 14, contributing to divisions within the cast. The transcript also notes that Bravo ultimately replaced the traditional season 14 reunion with separate watch party episodes because of the deep divisions among cast members. For viewers, those televised conflicts now appear alongside the more recent financial headlines, creating the impression that multiple storylines are converging at once. Whether that perception accurately reflects reality is another question entirely. Television captures moments. Legal proceedings follow their own timelines. Social media combines both into one continuous narrative. And once those narratives merge, they can be difficult to separate. By this stage, the conversation surrounding Teresa and Louie had expanded far beyond taxes alone. It had become a discussion about reputation, resilience, and whether one of Bravo's most recognizable figures could once again navigate intense public scrutiny while protecting both her family and her brand. But perhaps the most revealing chapter of this story wasn't unfolding inside a courtroom or on a television set. It was happening online, where celebrities, former cast members, family members, and thousands of fans were all offering dramatically different interpretations of the same set of headlines. And those competing reactions would soon become almost as significant as the legal filings themselves. If there was ever a moment when this story transformed from a financial headline into a full-scale public spectacle. It was when the conversation spilled onto social media. Court filings may have started the discussion, but they certainly didn't control it. Once the headlines reached TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Bravo fan pages, the narrative took on a life of its own. Almost overnight, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some believed this was proof that Teresa Giudice had once again found herself in the middle of another financial disaster. Others argued that people were rushing to conclusions before understanding what the legal documents actually said. And somewhere between those extremes were longtime viewers who simply couldn't ignore the uncomfortable similarities between today's headlines and the chapter of Teresa's life they remembered all too well. According to the transcript you provided, one of the most widely discussed reactions came from former Real Housewives of New York City star Bethany Frankel. The source describes Bethany posting commentary on social media questioning how someone who had previously experienced prison and the financial collapse of a marriage could choose not to sign a prenuptial agreement before marrying again. The transcript presents those remarks as part of the broader public debate surrounding the situation. Predictably, those comments didn't go unanswered. Within the Bravo community, opinions have always been divided. Some personalities viewed Bethany's remarks as fair criticism, arguing that public figures naturally invite public discussion when their personal and financial lives become headlines. Others believed the timing and tone were unnecessarily harsh, especially considering Teresa's long history of living through deeply personal challenges in front of television cameras. The transcript notes that fellow Real Housewives of New Jersey cast members defended Teresa, criticizing what they viewed as opportunistic commentary. According to the source, those responses framed the situation as an example of someone facing serious public pressure rather than an opportunity for social media content. Then another voice entered the conversation. It wasn't another housewife. It wasn't another Bravo executive. It was Teresa's eldest daughter. For viewers who have watched The Real Housewives of New Jersey since its earliest seasons, Gia Giudice represents something remarkable. Audiences first met her as a child growing up amid family celebrations, arguments, and unimaginable public scrutiny. Over the years, viewers watched her mature into a young adult, graduate from college, launch her own projects, and increasingly step into the role of defending her family when controversy erupted. The transcript explains that Gia publicly responded to criticism surrounding her mother and later addressed the situation through her podcast, emphasizing that Teresa has continued working to support the family and describing the tax matters as civil financial issues rather than evidence of criminal wrongdoing. The source also characterizes Gia's comments as an effort to push back against online speculation and defend her family's resilience. That response changed the tone of the conversation. Instead of only hearing from commentators and critics, audiences were suddenly hearing directly from someone inside the family. Whether viewers agreed with Gia's perspective or not, her involvement reminded people that these headlines affected more than television personalities. They affected children who had grown up in front of America. They affected family relationships that viewers had watched evolve for more than a decade. And they affected people who had already experienced one of the most public family crises in reality television history. That's often the part of celebrity news that's easiest to overlook. Behind every headline is a family navigating consequences that don't disappear when the cameras stop rolling. The transcript repeatedly emphasizes that Teresa has worked to rebuild both her career and her family's stability following the legal challenges that reshaped her life years ago. It frames Gia's comments as reinforcing that narrative of resilience while rejecting the idea that the family was falling apart despite the intense public scrutiny. Yet despite those reassurances, Another rumor refused to disappear: divorce. It quickly became one of the most searched terms associated with Teresa and Louie. But here's where it's important to separate reporting from speculation. The transcript acknowledges that online rumors about a possible separation circulated widely. However, it also notes that representatives for the couple maintained they were working through their personal and legal matters, and the source itself does not present a confirmed divorce filing or official announcement ending the marriage. That distinction matters. Rumors can spread much faster than court filings. A social media post can generate millions of views within hours. Legal proceedings, on the other hand, leave a paper trail. As of the information contained in the transcript you shared, the source discusses widespread speculation, but does not establish that a divorce had actually been filed or confirmed. Even so, the speculation had consequences. Every public appearance became subject to analysis. Every photograph was examined. Every interview was dissected for hidden meaning. If Teresa attended an event without Louie, it became a headline. If Louie wasn't mentioned during an interview, it sparked new theories. If either of them posted on social media, thousands of viewers searched for clues that may not have existed. That's the nature of celebrity culture in the digital age. Silence becomes evidence. Normal behavior becomes suspicious, and ordinary moments become viral investigations. The transcript also shifts attention to the broader business implications of the controversy. It discusses how major tax liens can create reputational challenges for public figures, particularly when brand partnerships and sponsorships are involved. The source suggests that ongoing financial headlines may increase commercial risk for celebrities whose income depends on television, endorsements, and public image, while also noting Teresa's reported earnings from the Real Housewives of New Jersey and her broader business ventures. For someone like Teresa, that raises a larger question. Her career has never depended on just one paycheck. Reality television opened the door. But over the years, she expanded into books, appearances, endorsements, social media, and other ventures that all rely, to some degree, on maintaining public interest and commercial appeal. Ironically, controversy has always been part of that formula. Some scandals damage a celebrity's career. Others keep them relevant. The challenge is knowing which kind you're facing. The transcript ultimately portrays Teresa as someone who has repeatedly turned adversity into opportunity, highlighting her continued efforts to build new business ventures despite the ongoing scrutiny. That perspective reflects one of the central tensions surrounding this entire story. Is this another chapter in a pattern of financial turmoil, or is it another obstacle that Teresa, as she has before, will eventually overcome? No one can answer that with certainty today. What is certain is that the conversation has expanded far beyond tax documents and television ratings. It has become a debate about resilience, accountability, public perception, and whether one of Bravo's most recognizable stars can once again redefine her narrative in the face of enormous public attention. And with legal matters still unfolding and fans closely watching every development, the next chapter may ultimately depend not on social media speculation, but on what happens inside court records, financial negotiations, and the couple's own decisions in the months ahead. As the headlines continued to dominate entertainment news, one reality became impossible to ignore. This story was no longer just about a federal tax filing, a luxury home, or even a reality television couple. It had evolved into something much bigger. It had become a public examination of reputation, redemption, and whether someone who has spent nearly 2 decades living under an extraordinary spotlight can ever truly escape the weight of their past. For Teresa Giudice, that question has followed her for years. Every new chapter in her life has been measured against the one before it. When she rebuilt her career after serving her sentence, many people said she had earned a second chance. When she found love again after her divorce from Joe Giudice, supporters believed she had finally found peace. When she married Luis Ruelas, there was genuine optimism among fans who hoped the difficult years were finally behind her. Now, with renewed attention surrounding public tax records, those same milestones are being viewed through an entirely different lens. According to the transcript you provided, the financial issues have also prompted renewed discussion about Teresa's future as one of Bravo's highest-profile personalities. The source notes that much of her commercial success has extended beyond reality television into books, appearances, endorsements, podcasts, and social media, while suggesting that continued public controversy may influence future business opportunities. That observation raises an interesting point. In today's entertainment industry, a celebrity's public image often functions as a business asset. Companies evaluating endorsement opportunities don't just look at follower counts. They examine headlines, public perception, brand safety, consumer sentiment. One controversial news cycle rarely determines an entire career, but repeated controversies can change the way brands evaluate long-term partnerships. At the same time, reality television has always operated by different rules. Drama drives conversation. Conversation drives ratings. And ratings keep franchises alive. Few reality stars understand that dynamic better than Teresa. Over the years, she has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to remain central to the conversation, even during the most difficult periods of her personal life. The transcript ultimately characterizes her as someone who has consistently transformed adversity into new professional opportunities, pointing to ongoing media ventures and continued audience interest despite repeated public challenges. Whether that pattern continues remains to be seen. Another major question hanging over this story involves the future of the Real Housewives of New Jersey itself. The franchise has reached a crossroads. Season 14 concluded under extraordinary circumstances, with deep divisions among cast members leading Bravo to replace the traditional reunion format. The transcript presents that decision as evidence of how fractured relationships within the cast had become. For years, Teresa has been one of the defining faces of the series. Supporters argue that her personal story has become inseparable from the identity of Real Housewives of New Jersey. Critics believe the franchise may need a fresh direction. Bravo has not publicly confirmed how future seasons will ultimately be structured, leaving fans to speculate about possible casting decisions and the show's long-term future. Whatever happens, it's difficult to imagine discussions about the series without Teresa remaining part of the conversation. But beyond network decisions and television contracts lies something even more personal: family. Throughout every major public controversy in Teresa's life, one constant has remained remarkably consistent: her daughters. The transcript repeatedly highlights Gia Giudice's public defense of her mother, describing her emergence as a confident spokesperson who has sought to reframe the conversation around resilience rather than scandal. For longtime viewers, that's one of the most striking transformations of all. The little girl audiences first met during the earliest seasons is now an adult speaking publicly on behalf of her family. That evolution serves as a reminder of just how much time has passed and just how much this family has experienced in full view of millions of viewers. It's easy to discuss tax filings, legal documents, and financial obligations as abstract concepts. It's much harder to remember the people living through those headlines. Whether viewers support Teresa or criticize her choices, few would argue that her family hasn't endured extraordinary public attention over the years. That attention brings opportunities. It also brings relentless scrutiny. Every court filing becomes a headline. Every interview becomes evidence. Every social media post becomes part of a larger narrative, sometimes fairly, sometimes not. As this story continues to develop, it's important to separate what has been documented from what remains speculative. Based on the transcript you provided, public records concerning federal tax liens have become central to the discussion, while rumors regarding the couple's relationship have circulated widely online. However, the source itself distinguishes between documented financial filings and unconfirmed speculation about the future of the marriage. That distinction may not generate the most dramatic headline, but it's the difference between reporting and rumor. The coming months will likely provide greater clarity. Payment arrangements may continue. Additional court filings could emerge. Public statements from the couple or their representatives may further address the situation. Or perhaps the story will gradually lose momentum as other headlines replace it. No one can predict exactly how it ends. What history tells us, however, is that Teresa Giudice has repeatedly faced moments when many believed her public career was over. Yet each time, she found a way to remain part of the conversation. Whether this becomes another chapter in that long story or marks a fundamentally different turning point will depend on developments that extend far beyond social media commentary. For now, the documented facts point to significant financial issues reflected in public filings. The internet, meanwhile, continues to debate everything else. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson from this entire story. Headlines can spark curiosity. Rumors can dominate timelines. But facts emerge through documents, verified statements, and time. Until those pieces come together, the most responsible approach is to distinguish confirmed information from speculation and allow the record to develop. One thing, however, is beyond dispute. Few reality television figures have experienced the extraordinary highs and devastating lows that Teresa Giudice has lived through in public. Whether admired for her resilience or criticized for her decisions, she remains one of the most discussed personalities in Bravo history. And as this latest chapter continues to unfold, audiences across the country will undoubtedly keep watching. Not simply to learn what happens next, but to see whether one of reality television's most enduring figures can once again navigate adversity under the brightest spotlight imaginable. If you've been following this story, what do you think? Do you believe this is another challenge Teresa and Louie will work through? Or do you think these financial headlines could have lasting consequences for their future? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth breakdowns of the biggest stories from the world of reality television, celebrity news, and Bravo, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation. Until next time, thanks for watching.